questions that we get asked often is when to prune our roses. Well, unfortunately, that answer can be somewhat complicated depending on what type of rose you might have. Now, one of the popular roses that you often see are the hybrid teas. These have been very popular over the centuries, and one of the things that makes them so popular is because they've been hybridized, so you get a lot of different colors, but also because they are known to have the longer stems that have a single large flower on them. So they're really great for cut flowers. Now, the thing about hybrid teas is they can be a little more high maintenance, and they often will tend to die back a little bit more in the winter time. Now you can see this hybrid tea that we just bought, it actually has been pruned the proper way. So going into spring, you want a very open center. It's pruned back about 8 to 12 inches so that you have those nice structure branches to then grow out. Hybrid teas can be a little winter finicky, and in fact sometimes you'll find that there is some dieback. So when I'm pruning roses, I always like to wait till I see a little bit of growth so that I know whether I'm pruning what I'm pruning. Of course, first thing you want to prune is anything that's dead wood. So if you do have some dead wood on the hybrid teas, you want to make sure to prune that out first. Again, keeping this open structure. One thing that will help as you go into those winter months to kind of prevent some of that winter kill is to mulch your hybrid teas about 8 to 10 inches with mulch to kind of insulate them through the winter months. One of the other popular roses that you often find in gardens and landscapes is the shrub rose. Now, these became popular in 2000 with the knockout rose that was introduced. And while knockout is kind of a floribunda shrub rose mix, you can see that these get rather large. They get about 6 to 8 feet tall and actually are a little bit hardier, so that you're not going to see as much winter kill back on these. And the other thing is you're not going to necessarily prune them as much. You're really pruning them more for maintenance. And so we will kind of take this back a little bit, but we aren't going to be as drastic with our cuts like we would on the hybrid teas. Now there's also the grandifloras, and grandifloras are actually a cross between floribunda and the hybrid tea. And then going down further in scale, you have your polyanthas and also your dwarf roses as well. Now, regardless of which type you actually have, one of the things to keep in mind is when does it actually bloom. So if it blooms early in the spring, then you're going to want to wait to prune it after it blooms. So a lot of times our climbers and our ramblers will bloom earlier in the spring, so we're going to wait to prune those until after they actually bloom. A lot of our others, like these shrub roses, they bloom throughout the season, so now's a good time to do that. Again, I like to wait until around March into the early spring season when we start to see some of this growth emerge, so that we can make sure we're actually cutting out any dead first. And then the next thing is if we have any diseases. Now, one of the diseases that you'll often see on roses is the rose rosette. Unfortunately, it is a disease that's really taken off and is spread pretty rapidly. So one of the things, if you see some of the symptoms, and we've done a segment a couple of years ago on rose rosette for you to identify those symptoms. A lot of times you'll see some new red growth coming out. And that's common on roses, but what happens with rose rosette is you'll see kind of a witch's broom or a clustering effect, and you'll continue to see red foliage later into the season. So to prevent that spread, if you think you might have that, of course, you want to identify it and then remove that rose. But also, just because you might not know, you want to make sure that you spray your pruners between each shrub every time you prune it. So Lysol works really well for this. You can spray it, and then you want to wait for about a minute to make sure that that really has got good contact and kind of work that into the crevices. And actually, Lysol works better than sometimes the 10% bleach solution or wiping it, because it really does get into those cracks. So we're going to prune this. So after we've cut out any dead or diseased plant tissue, the next thing that we're going to be doing is, when we are cutting just to reduce the size and the shape of the plant, is we want to make sure we're cutting towards buds that are growing outward from the center of the plant. This will continue to grow away from the center of the plant, therefore creating an open center, which will reduce the amount of moisture that can gather and cause diseases later on. Now you can see we took a fair amount off of these shrub roses, and honestly they would have been just fine had we not pruned them at all, but this definitely helps kind of revitalize the shrub and also keeps the height and the width of it in check a little bit. Now one of the other things, including the dead and diseased and crossing branches, we also looked for some of those older branches as well to go ahead and take those out and get some new younger growth in here. Now you do the same on your climbers and ramblers that are spring blooming after they actually bloom. So you're going to go in there and trim out some of those old side shoots that have flowers on them, and then also trim back older canes, leaving enough newer canes to kind of then recover that area that it's climbing on. The other thing too to keep in mind is if you have a newer rose shrub that say was just planted last year, you want to do minimal pruning on it, because as you do that, you just really want to allow the plant to establish itself more than having to produce a whole lot of vegetation. So be mindful of that. If you have a newer one, you don't want to trim very much on it also. The other thing is, as we prune these shrubs, when we have nice warm days, while we're still kind of in the early spring and might get freezing temperatures, it's going to continue to want to grow, but we're going to hold off on fertilizing until April because we don't necessarily want to encourage any additional growth. So while it can vary a little bit as to how you prune based off of what type of rose you have, you can always check out this fact sheet for more information.
We hope you enjoyed this video as part of our Oklahoma Gardening YouTube channel. You can also find even more videos on the OK Gardening Classics YouTube channel. And join us on social media for great gardening tips, photos, and discussion.